Hello again. This is Satan's Trilogy. It is Book 3, Chapter 4, and reading number 93. I am the author and the narrator. Please lean back, relax, and let the story unfold. Shaw 10 restaurant now used a dozen waiters to service all of the tables in the newly expanded restaurant. At the night's peak, the demand on Riley Grace was heavy, keeping her busy every minute. Then, at 7:15, the security personnel for the receipts pickup arrived. 2 security guards from the armored truck walked in and went to where the front reception podium stood. Here they usually picked up 2 or 3 locked bags of the evening's receipts to be delivered to the bank on the next day. Riley Grace rushed forward to the podium and greeted the 2 men. At a rapid glance, Riley appraised their parents, and something seemed wrong. "Just 1 minute, please." Riley smiled as she walked over to someone by the front window and said something minor to them. She then glanced out at the security truck, noticed it not to be the standard truck she had seen on the internet. Returning to the front podium, Riley Grace smiled as she reached under the counter and pulled out 4 bags, each with a huge padlock on it. "It's been a great night, our best ever." Riley Grace smiled. "There are 4 bags for you to pick up." The security officer wrote a receipt and handed it to Riley Grace, which she promptly signed and returned the carbon copy to the guard. Smiling, the guard smiled as his partner grabbed the bags and left the restaurant. "Have a great evening." "You do the same," Riley Grace smiled at him. Watching him leave, she kept her eye on him and went closer to the window. Taking a look without being seen, Riley Grace watched as a 3rd person opened the back of the truck, which quickly sped off. 4 people, said Riley Grace to herself as she went to the back room and called Esther. Esther quickly answered the call. "Esther," Riley Grace kept her voice calm. "The armored truck guards just left." After a pause, Riley Grace shared her news. "They came slightly early and were imposters. I gave them the false bags, and I managed to place my phone in the front pocket of one of the bags. There were 4 people minimum in a poor imitation of a armor truck." Riley Grace then added, "Esther, they were Chinese." "Esther," Riley Grace said, "the phone is the one you gave me." Esther had been listening, then finally responded, "Thank you, Riley Grace. I will deal with this and return your phone when we see you later." Esther paused, then added, "You did very well. I am impressed." As Esther hung up, she turned to Raven, Day, and Way. "Someone tried to impersonate the armored car pickup tonight and steal the night's receipts." Riley Grace gave them the false bags and managed to put her phone with one of the bags. "I think that we need to visit these people and teach them a lesson." Raven spoke first. "You're going to let us come along?" Esther grinned and said, "If you follow my instructions, you'll be fine." Esther added, "Riley Grace said the 2 in the restaurant were Chinese. They must be dealt with by Chinese and no one else." Wei looked concerned and asked, How is Riley Grace? Does she sound all right? Esther turned away, smiled, then responded, Riley Grace is fine. She has the skills to always be in control, and tonight was no exception. Good, said Wei. I knew she was exceptional, but this really goes beyond my expectations. The girls had only been at Carson's warehouse for a half hour when Riley Grace called. They had been bringing Wei up to date with the defensive moves that Esther had shown the others a week earlier. Wei was thrilled to be learning from Esther Saint. She knew many stories about her and had no doubt about her martial arts skills. Her father had shared letters from China describing Esther as a true master of several martial arts. Let's go, said Esther as she quickly moved towards the stairs. One flight down, and they were at the car. Esther had arranged to have a parking garage completed in the lower level, allowing her to park off the street. Esther had Day driving the Escalade as usual. Once on the street, a voice on the radio speaker started to give directions. Esther had told the onboard computer to find Riley Grace. The computer was using GPS to direct Esther to her cell phone. After only 18 minutes of driving, making 6 turns, they pulled up alongside a large armored truck pulled off to the side of the road. Esther said, I can't believe they had stopped on the side of the road. Give me 1 minute and then join us. Esther jumped out of the car and walked up to the truck. Hey, said Esther as she pounded on the truck's back door. Are you having trouble? Should I call the police? A couple of seconds passed and the rear door opened. Esther struck the person opening the door and jumped inside of the truck. Raven watched the truck, which seemed not to move. Day said, I think that is a minute, and opened her door. Let's go see what Esther has for us. Wei and Raven quickly followed Day as she made her way to the armored truck. Day pulled the rear door open just enough to see inside. Esther had the 4 men all on their knees at the far end of the truck. They all had their hands on top of their heads. They were young Chinese in their late teens to early 20s. They all seemed very frightened. Day, Wei, and Raven climbed onto the back of the armored truck and stood close to the rear as they watched Esther kneeling in front of the 4 men. Esther spoke without turning around to see the girls. This young man is Zhao Yanhu. He's a street orphan. His parents died several years ago in a car accident, and he had relied on friends ever since to survive. Esther pointed at the first man on the left. He didn't seem to look much different than the others. They were all Chinese, with black hair and about the same heights. Esther pointed at the second person. This is Q Quang. He is a graduate of Grant High, class of 2013. He's been unable to find work, he says. Esther then pointed to the third male. Wang Jinping works at Taco Bell and makes a little more than $10 an hour. He is married, has a sick baby boy at home. He needs money for a doctor. Finally, Zi Yanfei. He too graduated from Grant High, but could not find a job. He was accused of stealing groceries at a Kroger's and arrested but not convicted. He is only 18 years old. His mother works 2 part-time jobs cleaning to pay their rent. Esther stopped talking and then reminded the 4 men, keep your hands on your heads until I say you can lower them. Esther turned her back to the 4 young men and looked at her 3 friends. Wei, these four tried to rob your father's restaurant by deception. They walked in representing themselves as security guards from Transport Security. They walked in carrying plastic toy guns in their holsters. Esther looked back at the four young men and offered her opinion. The greatest risk in their robbery was to themselves, since they did not want to risk real danger to anyone else. They looked at Esther and said, "Robbing our uncle's restaurant is not a good thing." Raven had studied the four young men and then said to Esther, "I see four desperate men. I don't see four criminals." Wei had studied the four men as well, then turned to Esther. "I suspect that you have a suggestion. I may be older, but your years of travel have made you far more wise. I will follow your lead." Esther turned to the four young men and said, "Please lower your arms. My sisters and I agree. We are going to help the four of you. Tomorrow, go to Carson's warehouse. Be there at 5 in the morning. I have a good friend that will greet you and be your supervisor. The warehouse is opening tomorrow as a wholesale produce store. The farmers will bring their produce early, and we must be ready to receive customers early as well. Master Chi will instruct you. The four of you are the first to be hired. You will have to work hard. The pay will be good, and you will have excellent medical insurance. If any of you use drugs, you must stop. A condition of employment is that you are drug-free, and you must be tested every 3 months. So your bodies have 3 months to remove any drugs that might be in them. The job offer is for all of you, but if you choose not to accept the offer, then anyone else will be hired. Then someone else will be hired. I need 4 men, and you are very lucky because I do the hiring." The 4 young men looked at each other. They were humbled by Esther's offer. Z asked, "Why are you doing this?" Esther replied, "My name is Esther Saint. I am Chinese. I was born and raised in China. I have experienced much. You are 4 good men that took a wrong turn." Esther smiled, then added, "Besides, I need 4 strong men. This will be hard work. I can tell none of you are afraid of hard work." Zhao spoke up. "You don't look Chinese." Esther smiled and responded to him in Chinese. "And you don't look American. Yet you are living in the United States. I guess things aren't always what they appear to be." Zhao was startled. He was not prepared for Esther to speak such clear Chinese. He then quickly added, "I thought you were a myth." Zhao was watching Esther closely, then said, "Thank you, Esther Saint. I will be on time tomorrow and ready to work." Esther turned to Wei. "Do you carry a key for the bags?" Wei reached into her pocket and pulled out a small grouping of keys and tossed them to Esther. Esther looked at the lock on the bag and then grabbed the correct key to unlock it. Pulling out from the bag, Esther tossed a stack of cut paper to Zhao and said, "My little sister saw that you were not authorized personnel for the armored car service. She gave you bags of cut money and placed her phone in one of the bags." At that point, Esther found Riley Grace's phone in the pocket of one of the bags. Esther made a suggestion. "Next time you see her, you might thank her for calling me and not the police. It is because of her that you are going home tonight and not to jail. We have school tomorrow, and the 4 of you have your first day on the job. Please don't upset Mr. Chi. He is easier upset than I am." Esther smiled and said, "We all will meet again." Esther then pulled Riley Grace's phone from the side of the money bag and quickly put it into her pocket. Turning to Raven, Wei, and Day, Esther said, "Let's go bowling." The 4 girls left the truck, and the 4 Chinese men looked at each other in disbelief. Wang fanned through the cut paper that had been removed from the bag. "We robbed a restaurant and got a stack of paper. We were made by a little girl." Wang paused and added, "I hope tomorrow's job works out because we obviously have no future in crime." Zhou, Yu, Wang, and Z all stood still and looked at each other as the girls left the fake armor van and went back to the Escalade. Dave was first to talk. "I love bowling. Should I head for AC lanes?" Esther said, "That sounds good to me. The late night teams should have be done by now. I think I am becoming quite a good bowler." Esther turned away. "Have you bowled before?" Wei was still trying to process everything that had just happened and momentarily was lost in the question. Finally, she said, "I have never bowled. Is it hard?" Raven spoke up. "Well, bowling is easy, but bowling well takes some time and practice. Riley Grace and I have done a lot of bowling, and our average is just a little over 100. 300 would be a perfect game." Esther giggled, and everyone suddenly seemed more relaxed. "We don't have to be great bowlers. We just want to have some fun, and bowling is a lot of fun." Riley Grace was having a wonderful evening. She had managed to keep up with the fast pace of the evening and was able to place all of the walk-ins at a table. She had managed to use her Spanish several times during the night to aid in menu selections with customers. At midnight, the restaurant was nearly empty, with only a few tables taken. Esther, Raven, Day, and Wei walked in and were laughing about their bowling scores. Riley Grace was at the front desk checking out a customer. Esther walked over to Riley Grace, passing the customers on their way out. "You did very well tonight, Riley Grace. I am so proud. Your judgment is excellent." Esther gave Riley Grace a large hug and then a kiss on the cheek. The other 3 girls quickly joined them, each hugging Riley Grace and telling her she had done well. Mr. Hung came to the front and welcomed the girls back. "So did you girls have a fun evening?" "I hope so. Riley Grace did an excellent job, and I believe that this night was our best Sunday yet." Mr. Hung grabbed Riley Grace and hugged her from the side. This little girl not only looked good, took care of the customers, but was able to deal with difficult customers that not even I could handle. Mr. Hung looked at Riley Grace. "You are a natural for this job." Mr. Hung looked at the other 3 and said, "I don't want to worry you girls, but Riley Grace has set the bar extremely high." There was a pause, and then everyone laughed. It had been a wonderful evening for everyone. Wei would later explain to her father just how special Riley Grace was, and that she had saved over half of the evening's receipts from would-be robbers. Riley Grace looked years beyond her age. She had worn her high heels the entire evening and had no problems with blisters. Esther had done well in her selection of the shoes. Esther spoke up. "Why don't you grab your clothes, keep the dress with you? It is yours. and we'll be off." Once in the Escalade, the girls continued to chatter. While most girls their age might have been winding down for the evening, Dave pulled the Escalade up to in front of Raven and Riley Grace's home and said, "Tomorrow's another school day. Sweet dreams, you two." They giggled as Raven and Riley Grace both said back today, "Sweet dreams to you too." "Good night, Esther," they both said at the doors as the doors shut. Day decided to go to her home for the evening. After dropping her off, Esther was making her way home in the Escalade as her phone rang. The ring was that of the Song of a Robin. That alerted her that John was calling. Esther pulled the car to the curb and answered the call. Having grabbed her phone out of her hidden pocket, Esther quickly said, "Good evening, John. How may I help you tonight?" "Esther," said John, "how long before you can be at the Chicago International Hotel?" Esther knew their address and entered it into the car's mapping system. "Looks like I am 15 minutes away," said Esther. "I know it's late, but you're the only person that I trust to deal with this problem." John continued after a momentary pause. "We have a hostage situation involving China's President Xi Jinping." John paused. "Esther, know that you are Chinese. We need to quickly end this any way you can and quickly put it behind us." While listening to John, Esther was driving to the hotel. "John, do you have a site reaction van on site?" "Esther, it is at the corner of Jersey and Grant." John added, "That is at the southwest corner of the hotel." "I am here. Please send someone out to secure my Escalade." Esther quickly left the Escalade and moved into the back of the large van. John was inside the van. "Sorry, Esther, for interrupting your night. We have 5 people. We think they are all men. They have taken China's president hostage." Esther smiled at John. "How can I get in?" John said, "The best we can do is a hotel uniform and a room pass key. And there is a maid's cart at the elevators." John seemed a bit nervous. "We need this to go away quickly." Esther looked at John and said, 18 minutes and this will be over." Esther had stripped down and put on the hotel's uniform. She had studied the heat-sensitive scans of the 18th floor as she changed clothing. She knew where the 5 terrorists were at that moment. Now, if they didn't move in the next 6 minutes, Esther would end their attack and most likely their lives. John rolled up a blind that exposed dozens of weapons. Esther took a look and then told John, "There are plenty of weapons in the room. If I have to, I'll use theirs." Esther spotted a female agent's coat. "I need your coat," said Esther. The agent quickly removed her coat and handed it to Esther. Esther smiled, put the coat on, checked the pockets, and then said, "Thank you. I'll give it back before you know it." Spotting another agent that smoked, Esther looked at him and asked for his open pack of Camels and the lighter. He quickly gave them to her. Esther jumped out of the van and quickly walked around the building to the side entrance where the staff entered. Having studied the floor plan of the hotel, Esther walked directly to the elevators, having removed her coat but holding on to it. Taking the service elevator to the 18th floor, Esther stepped out of the elevator and went a few feet to the floor's service closet. Pulling out the maid's cart, Esther placed her coat under the cart onto a shelf and then made her way down the hallway. She stopped at suite 18333 and knocked softly on the door. Esther had allowed some cleavage to show. She knocked again, and no one answered, so she used her maid's passkey to enter the suite, knowing that she would immediately be taken. Pushing the cart into the room in front of her, Esther slowly entered as she repeated the words, "Housekeeping." As the door closed behind her, a male figure stepped forward with a gun pointed at her. Esther froze and attempted to show a smile and repeated the words, "Housekeeping." The man said, "Raise your hands." Esther said, "All I have are towels. If you don't need any, then I'll leave." The man barked at her, "Quiet. Step back and keep your hands up." Another person was at least 12 feet away, and he had drawn a handgun too. Both guns had what appeared to be silencers on them, and both men were watching Esther closely. "Housekeeping," Esther repeated. "If you don't want towels, I'll gladly leave." Esther pretended to be nervous. The two men seemed to relax a bit, decided that Esther was indeed just the towel girl, but Esther could see that they were considering how to deal with her. As the closest man moved in front of her, he tossed the towels from the cart onto the floor, looking for weapons. Esther opened her eyes wide and said, "He can keep the towels. Perhaps I should just leave." The man turned to Esther, and without thinking, he raised the gun away from Esther in order to bring it back to hit her with it. Esther moved quickly, striking at his neck with her left fist. She broke his neck and simultaneously pulled the gun from his hand with the other hand, pointing it at the other male in the room and putting a bullet between his eyes. As Esther pulled the trigger, she had rushed to the bedroom door where she burst in and fired the weapon toward three men. Each was getting up from a sitting position to see what the noise in the other room was. Esther had stopped them where they stood. Each had received a bullet in the head. On the bed was the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping. Wearing black silk pajamas, he was cuffed from behind, but seemed alert and well. Esther pulled her phone out and used her speed dial for John. It is clear," said Esther. "2 dead in the front room and 3 dead in the bedroom. The Chinese minister is fine." Esther looked at the 3 dead men and noticed a bulge in the pants pocket of the closest man. As she kicked his pants, the sound of keys was heard. Reaching into his pocket, Esther pulled out a key ring that held a dozen keys, including a key for the handcuffs. Esther turned to Z and smiled. A soft, reassuring smile that would relax him. She then started to speak to him in Chinese. "You're safe. There is no longer any risk, and you are no longer in danger." Esther kept her voice soft and calm. "The 5 men are Chinese. They are revolutionaries that were on the Chinese list of sought-after criminals." Esther smiled. "They are all dead." At that moment, John stood at the bedroom entrance and drew Esther's attention. "Esther, will you please tell the president that our people will quickly clean the rooms?" Esther spoke to Xi Jinping again in Chinese and explained the police would quickly step in and remove the dead men. Xi was still studying Esther as he nodded approval. John turned to the people behind him and gave the go-ahead. Quickly, a dozen people filled the room, removed all traces of the attackers, then quickly left. This was done in under a minute's time. Xi Jinping watched as his suite was cleaned within minutes of their arrival. Even minor blood splatter had been removed. An attractive Chinese woman entered the suite and spoke to the Chinese president. "Good news. Your wife and daughter will be here in 18 minutes. She smiled and said, "They know nothing of this, and I can assure you that you will be safe from this point on." That's the end of reading 93. Hope you enjoyed it. So until next time, be safe and take care. Thank you for listening.